We are streaming. Good morning, Nebraska. It is not often that there are like certain states that I don't get to visit, and Kalamazoo was on my hit list, and I got to talk with our good friend Dr. Hope Gerlach, and now be with you. It's like I'm knocking off two states that I don't talk to often. Iowa, I feel like you carry with you, Tricia Zebrowski and all your experiences in Iowa, so I get to like check that box off a little bit. And then Nebraska, wow, like what else is doing in Nebraska other than you and the good work you're doing? That's how a New Yorker would look at it. I'm sure there's a ton of great stuff. The other person that's in Nebraska, there's a lot of good stuff. The other person, my other favorite person in Nebraska is Frankie Jones. Frankie Jones is the rapper who features in the movie Transcending Stuttering. And thin black guy, great baller. He became a pastor, if I'm not mistaken. He's also a rapper. He recently released another album. Anyway, he's from Lincoln, Nebraska as well. And with that little sideways intro, here we are. And it's great to see you. So my name is Uri Schneider. This is the Transcending Stuttering podcast, exploratory research and development, talking and learning from some of the great people, around the world. And this morning to have Dr. Naomi Rodgers coming to join us. Again, one of the very, very important, articulate, and really exploring some of the most important things that until now have been somewhat of a black hole. And we'll talk more about what her research is all about. But she's doing some incredibly important work, and it's a big privilege. And due to her schedule, it took a couple months to get her to be able to be here. This was planned long in advance, but it's great to have her. And I'll just give an intro, and then we'll kick it right in. Dr. Naomi Rodgers is an assistant professor at University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She's the head of the UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln Stuttering Lab, where her holistic experiences as a person who stutters and an active member of the self-help community, speech language pathologist and stuttering researcher kind of all collide and come together to make the tapestry of who she is, inspire her to address empirical questions that are clinically grounded. And she's specifically interested in growing our understanding how people who stutter get ready to change, and how people who stutter process social emotional information. Without further ado, what did I miss? Welcome to this conversation, Naomi.
Thanks so much, I'm so honored to be here with you.
What's something that's not in the bio that you would hope people would know? You were telling me that your routine at home includes some other humans. I don't know what you want to share, but yeah, what would be something you'd like people to know that doesn't show up in your typical bio when you're presenting in a formal setting?
Yeah, so I live here in Lincoln with my husband, so we work in the same department. So home and work lives are very much blended, and it's beautiful in that way. We also have a toddler. Her name is Margot. She's 2 years old, and so she's keeping us on our toes. And so I guess one thing that's kind of fun is just get, I don't know, just as a speech pathologist and a person that's interested in human communication, it's just been mind-blowing to see her speech and language kind of explode right now. And so that's just been really, really fun and challenging, as those of you who have toddlers can empathize. But it's all good. Yeah. Never thought that I'd live in Nebraska. I mean, like, that rocked my world when it happened, but we're just loving it here. It's great.
If someone wants to go to Nebraska, what's one thing that you discovered is like one of the wonderful things about living in Nebraska, and what's something someone should prepare for because it's a bit of a change from maybe New York City or LA? Anything exciting there? What's the highlight? What's like the draw?
The draw is that people here are so friendly. I would say people here in Nebraska are friendlier than anywhere I've ever been. It's a very convenient place to live. Lincoln is actually much larger than I ever imagined before I came here. One thing that can be kind of a deterrent or kind of a shock is that there are more hogs than people in Nebraska. So if you're not, like not into farm animals, this might not be the place for you.
Gotcha. So like something like this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you would fit right in.
I'm not a cat. I'm not a cat. Okay, we'll move on. For those of you that are listening and not watching, I just put on a little filter, but I knew how to take it off. So Naomi, I am fascinated with so much of what you're doing, and we spoke last year, and I was able to, just contribute a little bit to what I could. to your studies. So we could kick off. You want to tell us whichever project you want to start with? There are two really epic projects you're invested in. You can start with whichever one, share what you feel is most important. And maybe we could also touch on around the time of Joe Biden, the inauguration, you had an incredible radio piece, which I shared and I will share on our blog when this is finished. I shared it on social, you know, NPR had you on, and I loved what you said. And I thought it was so great to hear your voice. So if you want to share on that and then maybe jump into the first and second projects, that'd be great. We can just roll from there.
So NPR's shortwave podcast reached out to me because they wanted to do a piece on stuttering, and they wanted it to come out on the day of Joe Biden's inauguration, which was really monumental. Obviously, people in the stuttering world are this is a huge rallying effort and excitement about that. So they reached out to me and they said they wanted to do a story about stuttering. And I said, well, how did you find me? Like, there's so many people in the stuttering world that are doing amazing work. And they said, well, you know, we're looking for someone that has been kind of in all spots at the table, right? So you have someone that's who knows the personal experience of stuttering. You have someone that also knows the research and the science behind stuttering, and also speech pathologist. And they're also, you know, like nowadays, like they're looking for folks who are of marginalized identities, minority populations, and so forth. So that you're getting into a pretty niche area at that point. So they reached out to me and it was so fun. We had a 2-hour conversation with the podcast host. I don't know how they boiled it down to 15 minutes, but they did. And yeah, it was just, I felt like the podcast hosts were really interested in kind of understanding the social aspect of stuttering. You know, I offered our medical diagnosis of stuttering, which is a very listener-based definition. That's stuttering is defined by these overt disfluencies, but that's missing the mark because the experience of stuttering is so personal. And so I think that our definitions of stuttering moving forward really need to be focusing on the speaker's experience of what that's like. And they got it, they understood it, and they really were fascinated by hearing about the medical model of disability versus the social model and how that applies to stuttering and what our society can be doing to make our world an easier and better place for folks who stutter. And so that was wrapped up in Joe Biden. And so, and his journey, his experiences, and the part that they didn't include in the podcast that—
this is great. You know, we're going to get the part that you wish they would have included or that you felt was important enough to share, but didn't get out there. So this is like the behind the scenes cutting room floor.
Yeah,
here we go. Let's hear what this piece is.
I mean, it's nothing new, but I feel like Joe Biden isn't really— he's elevating stuttering for the global community, and that's great, and stuttering is getting a lot of attention, but he's not owning it as well as a lot of us in the field really wish that he was. You know, he talks about overcoming stuttering, and he hasn't really talked openly about stuttering since he became the Democratic nominee. He had done stuff previously with AIS, he was the keynote speaker, and he's talked openly about it then, but ever since he was at all those debates and actually elevated himself to become the nominee, the stuttering story kind of went away, except for Brayden Harrington and his connection with Brayden. I know that you've talked to Brayden and his family. And so that was, it's been a little bit challenging trying to say yes, it's great. Joe Biden is really pushing the field forward in stuttering. He's getting the attention out there, but he's not doing it in a way that I think is really actually benefiting people who stutter, by educating the community, advocating for himself that he still stutters, but he's still obviously a hugely effective and influential leader. That part is missing.
That's
so
really
so then
that's super subtle. So that was shared on that NPR piece. Are you surprised they didn't include it?
No. So then they, that said the real star of the show is Brayden Harrington, right? He's the brave one. He's the one that was able to get up in front of a national audience and stutter openly. And that is the narrative that we need to be pushing forward. I think
Amanda Gorman said she's running in 2032. She's going to be Amanda in chief. So I think Brayden is probably 2036,
Oh, yeah.
Brayden in chief, you know what I'm saying?
I believe in them. It's great.
I think it's interesting just to kind of like jump into that. I think for a moment, parentheses, the question of, because you said there that the way he's handling his narrative maybe isn't doing enough or isn't really helping people who stutter, because it maybe perpetuates this idea of like this narrative, well, I used to stutter once, and I use that to my advantage when it's helpful to get whatever that gets. But on the other hand, today, I think most of us who understand this and see him, we know that he still grapples with it. And I think that's an objective truth. My father and I wrote a blog piece on it. It was picked up and spread a little bit, the paradox, right? And I've met so many people. I've met parents. I'm thinking of one person in particular, very successful person, a CEO of a major corporation. And he's a person who grew up with a stutter, and he says, and he's there for his child who stutters. And he says to me, I just want you to know, I don't stutter anymore. I'm done. Like I used to stutter all the time, and now I don't stutter. And then he says, but I want you to know, I want you to know that before I go on TV interviews, and I know there's a certain word that's like the key word for the interview, and that word is a word that I historically have come up against, I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking about it. And there's so many messages in that statement, but I just wonder if we could take that to the president, who is a person who stutters. He runs his life and his affairs as everyone has a right to, but certainly there's people in the community that wish he would be more open. I wonder, number one, what would you wish he would do or say? Like if you could call the shots, if you could advise him, what do you feel would be a realistic suggestion? And thinking about stages of change, like where he's at, you know, both in terms of context and in terms of his own journey. And I also wonder, second thought, and I've shared this with Barry Yeoman, I wonder if putting kids like Brayden out front is like a surrogate for something that he might not be ready to do, even on a personal level, or because of his position, he doesn't feel comfortable, but he's certainly expressing something special by putting someone like Brayden out front. And the videos that were shared, especially the ones that were not on the DNC, but where Brayden sent him a message like, listen, you're going to go to the debate and you're probably going to stutter, but wrong. And you can see how deeply that touched Joe Biden, and he didn't cut that off. He put that out there. So I just wonder, both in terms of stages of change, even for a person of his age and his position, I wonder if there's a piece of that that's indicated by how he's dealing with it. And secondly, I wonder if we can give him some credit by saying, like, he didn't have to put a kid as awesome as Brayden, who stutters as well as Brayden, out front, but he did. And I wonder if that's his way of saying, I don't have what this kid has. And when Brayden gets up there and I don't stutter, but I feel like so many adults who stutter absolutely go gaga for that kid, and all young people who show courage, because it's that free spirit inside all of us that at some point we started to mitigate, all of us, with whatever our challenges are. We started to hold back a little bit. See kids like Brayden and so many others every day living it, speaking their truth, expressing themselves freely in the face of a stutter is heroic. It inspires all of us. So I just wonder if you had a thought on that.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, a lot of good stuff. So I agree with you that I think by Biden elevating Brayden and highlighting his story and his reaching out to Biden across all of these moments, like I think you're right. I think that Joe Biden is saying, like, hey, look at this super brave kid, and we had this really special connection. But I think you're right that that's kind of his way of like disclosing to the world and talking about it when like maybe he himself like isn't really feeling I'm not sure that it's not quite bravery. I don't know what it is. I think it's complicated because he is of a different generation, you know, and so we know stuttering has been stigmatized for so long, and it still is. And so he spent his whole life maneuvering stuttering in a world that doesn't accept it, right? And so it's really hard to teach an old dog new tricks, right? And so I don't expect him to like all of a sudden now like embrace it and like stutter openly on national television, all that stuff, because like, I mean, that's just not going to happen. So I guess in terms of like what I hope he would say
I want to interject one thought. leading up to exactly whatever you're going to share, I think it's this, what we're hitting on right now is such, to me, an interesting observation of the dilemma that every parent and teacher faces with a young person who stutters, because they have their hopes of how that other person would handle their stutter. They have their own wishes of what would be best for that person, and maybe a little bit what would be best for them, but even, let's say, totally altruistically, like, I really think it'd be best if you would just, and I think in a way, we're walking into that same space, like wondering how would we want Joe Biden to handle it? But he is a public figure, and he is an important person in history, and certainly in the history of people who stutter, kind of demonstrating how far you can go. So I just wanted to share that this is not just about Joe Biden. It's also about how do people have their expectations and hopes, and then how do you kind of fit that to the other person who may be in a different place? And your best hopes with the best intentions could be so off, and it's exactly your topic. That's why I thought it was worth diving into.
Yeah, it's such a good point. I mean, I've worked with people who stutter, especially young people. Like, it is a dilemma, because as much as they want to work on being open, as much as like a person might want to like work on being open, disclosing, stuttering openly, there is fear of negative listener evaluations, right? And that's just such a hallmark experience of stuttering. But like, we as a speaker cannot control what other people think and do, just as like our listeners can't control what we, the speaker, think and do. And so I agree, like, I was going to offer like what I wish Joe Biden would say, but like, I think that you're right, that like ultimately, like, it's his journey, and like the way that he's handling it is like, it's him. And like, I do think that it is dangerous to critique a person's personal narrative, right? And that's probably why NPR didn't include that part of in the podcast.
I think there are other reasons. I don't think that was the subtlety. I think that it was a moment to just be all positive and oozing of goodness, which it was for the purpose of that. A totally apolitical comment there. But going back to what you said, with all that being said, if you had your withers, if you could dream it up, what would you offer? What would you wish would be the way he would tell the story, the way he would open a bit more?
I mean, just like calling it how it is. Like, we all, like those of us that have tuned ears, right? Like, we listen to him talk and we're like, oh, there was an avoidance, there was an avoidance, there was another avoidance, right? And just like all of, so I guess my hope for like the broader stuttering community is that he would just say like, I might have overcome the like, social barriers to like, it hasn't held me back from achieving, the highest level in the world. It's incredible. Like, obviously hasn't held him back. But talking about how it's still a thing that he experiences daily, it's still a thing that he's coping with. It hasn't gotten in his way of being an effective communicator, an effective leader, an ally, an advocate. Like, all of his identities and all of his roles in our world are still there, even if he stutters or not, right? And so it's almost as if like he's trying to save face by not talking about it, but stuttering has probably propelled him to achieve those things in a way. A lot of people who stutter talk about how they're more empathetic, they're better listeners, they're better people all around because of their experiences with stuttering. And so I just wish that he would help our society understand that stuttering is not associated with reduced intelligence or capability and all of those misconceptions. He could really lead the charge and say like, hey, I still stutter sometimes. I still cope with it on a daily basis, but look at all the amazing things that I'm able to accomplish. And this is true for all people who stutter. It doesn't have to hold people back. It actually propel them to achieve wonderful, amazing things. And that's just the narrative that I hope that he would spin in an ideal world.
Well, until he does it, it's good that there are people like you out there making that impact and getting the world to know what they need. And the other thought is going with your approach, looking at the stages of change. There's still time in the clock. There's still time in the clock in his presidency, and hopefully for as long as he serves, he should be strong and healthy. And there's more time after that where he may, out of office, say things that he's not ready to say yet. But that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So with that, let's go to maybe the stages of change, and maybe talking about, you talked about generational stuff. I think it's a great transition to talk about. You studied in Iowa. Iowa has a bit of history in our field, And I think that you and I and all of us in our, we're all in our 20s, I guess, we stand on the shoulders of giants, people who we look up to who are like in their 30s and 40s, people like Tricia Zebrowski and others. So what can you tell us about the legacy of Iowa and the legend that is Tricia Zebrowski and the kind of impact
in of itself.
Okay, well, I think it deserves it. Tricia, you're welcome, next week. But just in a nutshell, for people that have no idea what Iowa means to the evolution of our field and the evolution of the literature, as well as Tricia as an individual, just a few nuggets, and then we can get to your current work, because I think we have to recognize all of our today is on the shoulders of people that tread the path before us.
Of course, yes, yeah. I'm so glad that you brought this up. So, as you said, there is an incredible amount of history at the University of Iowa. So back in the 1920s, there were a group of actually psychologists who started the field of speech pathology at the University of Iowa in Iowa City. They realized that there was really no specialty to address communication differences and issues. So there was a group of psychologists that started this new program at the University of Iowa, and they identified one man. His name was Lee Travis, and they identified him as kind of like the pioneer of this new field. And the first problem was the area of stuttering. And so what's fascinating is what that means is like that those interconnections between like speech and language and psychology and the interconnection of those started because of stuttering, which, as we all know, like is still highly relevant today. So that started, and then like Iowa City and the University of Iowa became this hub for people who stutter to come for specialized treatment. The people were coming from all over the country, and also the training of therapists and researchers in the area of stuttering. So then we got Wendell Johnson, we got Dean Williams, we got Charles Van Riper, and we got all of the greats who trained at the University of Iowa. And so without going into too much additional history about like all of the like really seminal theories and stuff that came out of that time. So the University of Iowa had Wendell Johnson. He was like actually the speech and hearing department at the University of Iowa was named after him. After Wendell Johnson came Dean Williams. Was Dean Williams' student, so he was faculty at Iowa for his career. And then came Tricia. And so Tricia was at the University of Iowa from the 1980s until her retirement just a couple of years ago. So the University of Iowa is this hub, an incredible history. And there have really only been 3 stuttering specialists that have held that position at that university. And so Tricia obviously is so highly regarded in our field, and she's such a master clinician and just all around just amazing person and storyteller. And so it was just, so she's enjoying her retirement now. And
she doesn't seem that retired. Like, it's interesting, and it's so remarkable. So many of our colleagues, they don't retire. They kind of retire on paper, and they just can't stop, because Tricia's still running, facilitating all kinds of things with friends for young people who stutter, and active with you and speaking. So we should have her longevity and her energy and her commitment.
Yes. And so Tricia's last big project before she retired was taking the stages of change model and applying it to the change process, especially for adolescents, because adolescents who stutter were her bread and butter. That was the population that she was most challenged and inspired by. And so the stages of change model was born out of the fields of behavioral health and health psychology to say that people, a person's readiness to change has a huge impact on their change outcomes. So if a person is not ready to change, but they're working with a therapist or they're going to the self-help community and they're being bombarded with activities and exercises to do that they're not ready to engage in, that's a mismatch of the person's readiness to change and the stuff that they think is going to help them. And so you're going to get a lot of resistance, right? You're not going to get a lot of forward movement in the change process. If we can identify a person's readiness to change and then match our therapeutic techniques to that person's readiness, then we can maximize those change outcomes. And so that's a way of tailoring our interventions to a person's readiness to embark on the journey and to do these new scary things that we often ask them to do. And so that model started
just to make that for those, I'm gonna just break it down for people that are I mean, Naomi is talking at such a profound level I'll just break it down for the clinical frontline. There were some questions from people also who might not appreciate how rich and practical and impactful those comments are. What that means is not only is there no one way for every person who stutters, not only is there no one way for every therapist, but actually whatever your skill set is and whatever exercises and experiences and suggestions and approaches you're equipped to use, even within that, you need to look at not only the bean counting of how many stuttered moments and not only what type of stutter, but there's this other aspect that's been overlooked, and that is the person, and that there's an evolution of readiness. And the day that their parents thrust them into therapy doesn't mean that they're ready to jump all in. It might mean they're ready to put their feet in. And if you do a full immersion experience, it might not be the right fit. You have to figure out what stage they're at, and just adding that to the assessment and to the data that you're constantly looking for to inform what will be the best fit experience, the right thing to serve. I think of it like you go to a restaurant, there's an appetizer, there's a main course, there's a dessert. If you served up the dessert, you bring out the dessert, cart too early, it's just out of step. And therapy is sometimes out of step. It's not that it's bad or that it's good, but if it's not the right fit at the right time, it's just off.
Yeah. And so I think that a lot of clinicians think, well, if there is a person who stutters that I'm working with, if we can, but they are also presented with a lot of negative thoughts and feelings about themselves or communication, if we can get them to stutter less, then those negative thoughts and feelings will go down also. But I think that that is totally backwards, right? And so I think that as a part of this research project, I interviewed a lot of stuttering specialists and adults who stutter themselves, who've been in the therapy process. And across the board, stuttering specialists and folks who stutter agree that you need to start with addressing those thoughts and feelings first to kind of reduce the emotionality around stuttering, to learn more about stuttering, to allow the person to not be so afraid of approaching it and working with it. And so that was one of the biggest takeaways that we've gotten out of our research, is just the importance of that holistic approach and not having that unidimensional focus on fluency first, because that could be, obviously a fallacy. That if we address this, if we make the stuttering go away, then they're going to feel better about themselves.
Awesome. So that's super. So where is that kind of in its evolution of your work, and kind of what have you achieved and what yet lies in front of us as we follow your journey? So
Tricia, as I said, that was kind of her last big project. So she got an ASHA Foundation Clinical Research Grant to apply this. And I didn't really talk about the 5 stages yet, but there are 5 stages of change. So I might just summarize those really quickly because I think it's helpful. So the first stage is known as pre-contemplation. So people who are in pre-contemplation are not at all thinking about making a change. They are either denying that there's a problem, or they are hugely overestimating the cons of making a change. And so they are kind of stuck. They're like not thinking about a solution because they don't think that there's a problem necessarily. And so these might be clients who stutter that are brought to therapy by their parents or by their employer, someone, but they themselves don't think that this is a problem. The next stage is contemplation. So contemplation is when folks are thinking about making a change in the near future, so perhaps like in the next 6 months or so. So these people might still be kind of overestimating the cons of making a change, but they're, maybe they're starting to think about joining a self-help group, or maybe they're thinking about starting or calling an SLP for initial eval. Maybe they're starting to follow people who stutter on TikTok or Twitter and stuff like that. And so they don't have concrete plans for how to change, but they're starting to think like, this doesn't feel right, and there's something that I might want to do about this.
They might even be listening to you right now.
Yeah, totally. Yes. And so the third stage is preparation. So people who are in preparation are taking baby steps to actually engage in some new behaviors, whatever those are, in the immediate future. So we're thinking like in the next month or so. So these are people that have called to make that first appointment with the speech therapist. They are they have it on their calendar to go to that first support group meeting. Maybe they have gotten an autobiographical book about stuttering, and they're really educating themselves and taking baby steps towards making change. So the fourth step is action, right? So action is where people are actively learning a new skill or changing a behavior. And most clinicians think that clients are in action when they show up at their office for that first evaluation. And that is a huge problem. That's stage 4 out of 5. And so in action, people are trying on new skills. They're learning how to change their thoughts and feelings. They're learning how to change how they talk. They're actively seeking out interactions that they're afraid of. Like, they're actively doing things to make positive changes. And people are in action for about 6 months or so. Once they've moved beyond that time frame, then we said that they're in maintenance. And so people can be in maintenance for as little as 6 months through the end of their life. It could last forever. People in maintenance are working hard to maintain those changes. They're trying to resist relapse. That's kind of like a stages of change model lingo, but they're resisting relapse. And so they are, even if they've had a difficult speaking situation, they are getting back on their horse and moving forward. They're not ruminating so much. It's not really defeating them. We know that stuttering is highly variable. And so people who are in maintenance tend to kind of ride those waves well, and just have this level of acceptance of the challenge of stuttering and have learned to cope with it well. So that's kind of a summary of the 5 stages. And so Tricia,
again,
go ahead.
Huge, just to give people pause.
Yeah.
That was epic. If you're resonating with that, drop a comment or a like on the video. But just the idea that there's actually a framework to think about staging, like where a person's at. I think of it similar to a Tesla launch. And obviously I always think of a SpaceX launch, excuse me. Tesla takes off on a more horizontal plane. I'm talking about SpaceX going vertical, but you have different things that need to go well at different stages, right? And different teams become relevant at different stages, and they're not relevant at other stages. So the team that maneuvers, out of orbit rockets that are positioning, anyone that knows who I'm talking about, what I'm talking about, but is not relevant at liftoff when the greatest amount of thrust is required. So the same thing in the therapeutic journey. There's this idea and looking at how this applies. So I think it can be very eye-opening for anyone that's listening, for yourself, for someone you love, for someone that you're trying to provide care for and be a champion for. Thinking about what they're ready for is so important. Yeah. And I just think that's precious.
Yeah. And this is a way to really tailor our therapy to the individual client, and a way to ensure that our therapy is personally meaningful for the clients that we're working with. And I think that one way that we express and show our expertise, for lack of a better word, because I wholly believe that the clients are the experts, but we can show our competence as clinicians by expressing our understanding that you might not be ready for this, and that is okay. Making a positive change to stuttering is really, really hard work, and it takes a lot. It takes a lot of support, and it's a very complex, messy process, but I am here to support you, and we are going to do what you're ready to do on your terms. And so
Naomi, tell me if it bothers you that I keep interrupting. Do you want to keep your train? Because I just want to tell you,
it's all good.
You eat this for lunch. And you're in Lincoln, Nebraska, and for all of its beauty and all of the hogs and all of the space and all of the friendliness, I'm not sure you know how much what you're saying is resonating with people. So I just want to give you a taste of the comments that are flowing in as we're live on Facebook. Tom Sharstein, I could listen to this all day. Excellent. Caitlin Sapp, such an elegant framework, Dr. Rodgers. Amy Dixon-Heron, wow. So many SLPs could really use and understand these stages. And that is so true. This is why I think what you're doing is so important. It's so relatable. It's so humanizing. It's so bringing research out of the lab and into real life. Like, as humans, I feel like this is something we experience when you size something up in a sterile lab and you see what fluency technique works, or even things that deal with thoughts and feelings, but it's all in a controlled space. This is the real stuff, like thinking about developmental maturation and processes, but also these known stages of readiness and how we meet them where they're at and take that into consideration, I think has been missing. And it's going to change the way people look at their own journey and why they're stuck. Maybe that's just where they're at. They're in an earlier stage where they're in that kind of seesaw. I want to do something, but I'm not. And then, you know, being kind to self, and also if you're side by side with someone going through this, so it just gives so much understanding. So I just want you to know how meaningful this work is.
Yeah.
I'll shut up so you can keep talking all this valuable
No,
stuff.
that's really helpful. And I think what you just said, that it helps normalize the experience of feeling stuck in the change process. And that's what I really appreciate about this model, this framework, because so many people who stutter, as with people who are trying to change other target behaviors, like people who are trying to lose weight or eat healthier or manage anxiety and depression or manage all sorts of conditions, it's the same thing. Like, there are different levels of readiness to like do the hard work. And I think what's really powerful about this framework, the stages of change framework, is that it normalizes being in those early stages of readiness. And so what's cool, what I'm hoping to do in the future, and this is kind of Tricia's legacy.
I'm going to jump in just 1 second. You know what people call it when someone's at an earlier stage and they don't realize it's an earlier stage? You know what they call it? The 4-letter word starts with an L. It should be considered a 4-letter word, L-A-Z-Y. You're being lazy. Just put yourself into it. And that shaming, and it's really just a necessary, normal, natural stage. And guess what? If you jump steps, not only is it important to give people the time to move through these stages, but if you try to accelerate someone and they don't get a chance to move through the stage, they're going to pay for it later. For most people, for most people, you can't push a river, right? So just wanted to share how profound. Not only is it normalizing, but it's also sharing these are actually important touchstones, important pieces and steps along the way that people have to go through, grapple with, sit with, and each one of them deserves a supportive person at your side, and certainly being supportive and kind to oneself along the way.
Of course.
Sorry for interrupting again.
No, it's okay. I think, I think oftentimes these people who are feeling stuck are viewed as being lazy or being unmotivated, that it's like a character flaw that they have that they need to work out on their own. And so oftentimes if you have a client who stutters that comes to therapy and they're just not engaging, they're not doing the things that the client or the clinicians ask them to do, they're not doing their home practice, they're just feeling kind of like disengaged or appearing disengaged. How often does it happen that the SLP says, you know what, it doesn't appear that you are very motivated to work on this, so we're going to put our relationship on hold and you come back when you're ready. And that is hugely problematic, because then you are telling this person that they need to do all the hard work of getting motivated on their own. How do they do that? That's really challenging. And so what I hope to do as a field, I hope that we can equip clinicians to feel more competent in helping clients get ready for change, help those people that are in the earlier stages. Instead of throwing speech tools at them, can we identify where they are, use evidence-based activities, practices that are stage matched, right? That are matched for those earlier stages to help move a person forward. And so that's where I think the power in this framework really lies, that there are actually things that we can do as clinicians to help clients get ready for change. And I know that a lot of clinicians, I always get asked this question at talks and in my classes and stuff, that, you know, like, we're toeing the line of like counseling and psychology, and where does our role kind of end, and you know, the next service provider's role begin. And so, you know, ASHA guidelines tell us, you know, like, if it's related to communication, it's our role to help the client in that capacity. And so I think that we, as a field and as academics, need to do a better job of training clinicians to feel more competent working with folks who stutter, and all people. It's not just stuttering. I'm sure that this model applies to folks that are learning to use a different type of voice, or people that have dysarthria and voice disorders, and all sorts of different types of populations. It's not just stuttering. So listen, that's my hope.
You drink from the Iowa waters. I drink from the waters of Dr. Phil, my esteemed father. So counseling is in my blood. But I would just say, to your point, on the one hand, we've got to lean into the fact that speech language pathologists need to get comfortable talking about the thoughts and feelings around all sorts of communication issues, whether it's aphasia, stuttering, voice, all sorts of things. And at the same time, you've got to know where the boundaries are. So we had a our last office hours guest for the Transcending Stuttering cohort of speech language pathologists, we had Jerry McGuire, and I said to him, Jerry, can you give some guidelines of when do you know you're out of bounds? When do you know it's time to make that referral out? And so if you're dealing with something that's looking like depression, or you're looking at something that's looking like anxiety, that's a telltale sign that you need to refer out. If you're dealing with the common feelings related to this communication issue, and which can include social anxiety and feelings of low self-worth, but they're really focused and the genesis of them is rooted in this communication issue, speech language pathologists may be better equipped because the average psychologist and psychiatrist knows even less. As you know, as much as most people don't know enough about stuttering, the mental health profession has a lot to level up as much as we do in our profession and in the world, but we shouldn't assume that if someone's having thoughts and feelings, we should refer them out. At the same time, just know if you're dealing with someone, you're trying to help someone, you need to make sure they get the appropriate help that they deserve. So I just wanted to add that one. Now we could spend the entire talk, and I have no problem on that, on the stages of change. It's your call. We're obviously going to have a round two. Just drop a like or a comment if you want round two with Dr. Rodgers. I certainly do, but it's up to you. I'm going to let you, Naomi, decide, do you want to, I know there was another piece that you wanted to share with us. So really it's up to you how you want to.
I think we should just ride this wave. I think this is a topic that really resonates with people.
Yes, people are resonating all right. Yeah, ride the wave.
So I thought what we could do is I can share some preliminary results of the newest research study that Dr. Hope Gerlach and I just did. So just segueing here. So Tricia Zebrowski established this project with adolescents who stutter because she found that adolescents tend to be the most resistant to therapy. So we did that project and we did all of these assessments, and we found that the 5 stages of change really does apply to the change process for adolescents. So Tricia retired, and then Hope Gerlach and I, who's at Western Michigan University, decided that we need to carry this project forward. It's like, let's try to build a developmental model of what the stages of change looks like across the lifespan. So we decided to go into adulthood. So we the first step of applying this 5-stage framework to a new population is to interview lots of stakeholders who are a part of that process. So we interviewed stuttering specialists, including some folks who stutter themselves, and then also adults who stutter that have been in therapy and have made successful changes to their stuttering or their stuttering experience. We interviewed a lot of people and we qualitatively analyzed their data. And so I thought, so just the main question that we asked was, what would an adult who stutters be doing if they were making a positive change to their stuttering? And so we really focused on the behaviors, right? Because we as SLPs, we are behavioral therapists and we try to help people acquire new skills. So that was our focus. What are the specific behaviors that folks would be doing if they were making positive changes? And so we got so much incredible data, but we were able to boil it down to some themes. And so I thought that I would share this with you, and then we can kind of have a discussion about them.
If Eric Raj is here, I'm just asking for like a drum roll, please, because I know everyone's on the edge of their seats to hear, what did you learn? What were some of those preliminary findings?
Yeah. Okay. So we have like high level themes that I'll talk about first. So high level themes, there are 3 of them. So the first one is, and I'm going to read them here just so I get them right. Noticing and adjusting physical behaviors involved in speaking to the extent that it is personally important to do so. The second theme is developing neutral or positive thoughts and feelings about stuttering. And the third one is participating more fully in social and professional activities, even if you stutter or think you might stutter. So we have some qualifiers there. So in the first theme, so it's the idea of noticing and adjusting speech to make it easier on the speaker. And so I think that Hope Gerlach and I are really trying to focus in on what works for the speaker. We want the speaker to feel better and more at ease with their own communication. It's less about what the listener perceives, right? So is it personally important for the speaker to notice and adjust how they're talking to make talking easier? A couple of things a couple like sub themes that came along with this. It's important to develop some preliminary skills for changing behavior. So this might be things like learning about the speech mechanism, increasing behavioral awareness, increasing choices about how to adjust moments of stuttering. This also involved changing communication in real-time interactions. So this might be decreasing tension or decreasing mental effort when speaking, reducing escape behaviors and stuff like that. How do we actually modify those moments of talking? And then a critical step is generalizing those behaviors outside the therapy room, right? So self-coaching outside the therapy setting, using a linguistic and a fear hierarchy to practice these new skills in a scaffolded way. So that was the first theme, and like the specific behaviors that go along with that. I'm going to keep going because you're nodding along here. Okay. Okay. The second theme is
I'm just going to echo what Tom said.
Yeah.
I could listen to you all day long. It was an honor and a privilege to have that interview with you a year ago, and I was so eager to hear, you know, what else you learned. So yeah, this is delicious. Thanks.
So the second theme is developing neutral or positive thoughts and feelings about stuttering. So a couple specific behaviors here. So it's really important for clients to expand their definition of what success means. So not focusing on fluency, but what other things can we be working towards that would indicate success? Along with that, talking about stuttering more neutrally. So actually looking at the language that a client is using to talk about the stuttering experience, and also noticing when change occurs in small steps. I think oftentimes people who stutter kind of expect, I'm going to go to therapy, I'm going to make these huge life changes and things are going to like make a total 180. That's not how the change process works. We know that change happens incrementally and in small steps. So that's really important too, to help clients focus on noticing those small steps of change. Another big thing was being open to difficult experiences. So it's important to help the client become okay with the hard parts of stuttering, including how variable it is. That's a huge theme for people who stutter. It's really challenging to never know what stuttering is going to be like. And just being open to talking about the experience. It's okay to feel fear and shame. That's totally okay. And it has to, and it's helpful when the client is okay to explore what those feelings are like. Another big thing was feeling more relaxed in moments of stuttering. So working on desensitization and developing adaptive responses to anticipation. So when a person anticipates stuttering, are they able to still approach that feared word or that feared interaction in an adaptive way? And also ruminating less after a moment of stuttering occurs. Like, we know that stuttering is going to happen. We're going to get negative listener reactions, but is the person able to head back up and kind of keep moving forward and ruminate less? Another big one was understanding how stuttering fits into one's identity. So a lot of adults who stutter in particular talked about the importance of focusing on other parts of themselves outside of stuttering. So focusing on other hobbies, values, like other identities, to kind of take the spotlight off of stuttering and just make it really honor the fact that they are this really complex tapestry that's made up of many identities. And then working towards reducing shame.
How many more have you got? Then I want to give you a chance to bring something down to the playing field for the people that are listening.
Okay, for sure. I can stop there. I can talk about
some highlights. Don't stop. I just don't know if there's another 20, because there's all good. It's all each one of these. And I also hope someone's writing this down. I did post that I would love everyone's help for this conversation and every conversation. Catch that highlight, that takeaway, that thing that resonated for you. And if you would send it to us with the timestamp of when it happened, we will take the best and we will try to re-share those in small bites. But Naomi just shared like 40 gems. So I hope someone's writing it down, because we're going to transcribe this afterwards, but we could use your help. So yeah, Naomi, please.
Let me just talk about the highlights of our last third theme. And this is, I'm really just offering these for SLPs that are listening, that are like looking for like specific behaviors that they can focus on in therapy that are not focused on fluency. There are lots of other things that we can be doing here. So our last big theme was participating more fully in social and professional activities, even if you stutter or think you might stutter. So this includes things like talking more openly about stuttering, saying more of what you want to say, prioritizing social connection over stuttering, increasing one's agency in the moment. And so those are just, yeah, and we have like specific activities and behaviors that kind of fall into all of those categories there. But those are just some ideas for like specific behaviors that we can offer to clients as either alternatives or additions to any of those speech changes that they want to make as well.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, well, thank you to you and like the other like stuttering specialists and all the adults who stutter that participated, because it was such a complex question and analysis process, and there was just so much goodness. And so I think that this can just be really, really impactful to help SLPs who work with people who stutter, but also those generalist SLPs that we often encounter that don't quite know how to work on anything other than stuttering, and how to prioritize those other skills that lead to effective communication as well.
Mind blown. Well, it was, I remember that conversation with you, Naomi, and I don't know what you remember from it, but what I remember, I was like, we are very lucky to have someone like you running this show, because the way you guided the questions, and I'm sure it was with Hope's input and Tricia's contributions and whatnot. So it's not it's not a solo project, but I was just so grateful because you took a very touchy-feely and kind of narrative, qualitative thing, and you really were starting to drill it in using very sharp thinking and good ways of framing things. So I'm grateful you're doing that. Two things that hit me, and then maybe just to take a chance and bring it back to the personal or to the individual from your insight, from others. I would say, number one, what's fascinating about what you said that hits me, and this is something I got from Chris and Camilla, I often refer to this as one of the most impactful, and I think it was 2006, if I'm not mistaken, in Miami, ASHA pre-conference with her, and Jeb Brown was also on the slate. But she talked about the heuristics, problem solving. And so what's beautiful about what Naomi's offering, and I do this all the time when I meet people, instead of problem solving like a whack-a-mole of like, what's the problem in front of you? If these are the outcomes that a person who is in a good place, in a strong state, if these are the things that we would wish or say, that's good, like that's a good outcome right there. That's what a good outcome looks like. It would be cool because it shifts everything. Instead of at the beginning of the journey, fixing every problem that comes up, you use these as your navigational intelligence to say, that's where we want to get to. What choice? Another thing I loved about the interview on the Stutter Talk, if anyone didn't hear it, Stutter Talk, Naomi had a beautiful conversation back in 2018 from the NSA conference. And what was amazing was she talked about like a choose your own adventure. And I don't remember, Naomi, if you remember, that's exactly how I described the Transcending Stuttering, framework, is a choose your own adventure, because different people, different stages, different things that are important, but keeping the eye on the prize and kind of working backwards. Instead of looking at the today and figuring out how do we fix today, where do we want to be 5 years from now, 3 years from now, a year, a month from now, and having that as your goal, and every decision along the way to figure out, is that going to bring me there? That's one thought. The second thought is that all these things that Naomi just shared, I would say layer on, she's talking about the stages of change. And this is something I was really absorbing from Michael Sugarman, the idea of layering experiences and the sequence of experiences that could be helpful. So the idea of individual engagement with a professional, engagement in group therapy, peer-to-peer support, mentor peer support, the idea of self-help support, and how each of those it's not either or, but for different people, how you sequence it or how you layer it can make all the difference. For sure. What I wanted to do was make it personal, Naomi, from your experience being a person who's gone through growing up with a stutter, and look at you today, and knowing what you know from the field. What are some of the most egregious things that happen that can derail these outcomes? In other words, what are like practical examples of well-meaning episodes that just completely miss the mark on getting these sort of outcomes? And on the other hand, what were some things that either you experienced or maybe you observed that just so speak to this? And I know there was something you shared on that podcast that stuck with me about what the therapist didn't do that was helpful in regards to this. So I was just wondering, like, what are some common mistakes that are well-intended, best intentions, but just really don't get people to a strong place, these kind of outcomes.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, what are some examples of really hitting the mark with this? And maybe we can wrap on that.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of highlight what I mentioned earlier. I think that a lot of clinicians have this fallacy where if we help reduce the stuttering, then the positive thoughts and feelings will follow. And that is just not the case. We know that people who've been stuttering for a while are going to stutter for the rest of their lives. And the way to improve communication, improved social connection, improved participation and engagement in all areas of their life are not telling them to think about changing how they talk all the time. That is going to interfere with their attempts to fully engage with their communication partners. So taking the focus off the fluency, are there other things that we can focus on to bolster your ability to communicate effectively and to truly connect with those people that you're talking to advocate for yourself, to allow people to talk with greater ease and greater spontaneity, because we know from the work of Chris Constantino, Vivian Siskin, and so many others that is really, for a lot of people, that's the key to living well with stuttering, is just taking the focus off the stuttering and getting back into their bodies and getting back into the interaction, just as typically fluent speakers are afforded every single day.
Do you know what I'm referring to from that episode?
Yeah.
Can I jar your?
So,
because I think that was so powerful, because I think
yeah.
one of the principles that I share with therapists, and I remind myself as a parent, as a very imperfect parent of 4 kids, sometimes you don't achieve more by doing more. You achieve more by doing less. You can't just keep adding and adding. I actually heard this on a Tim Ferriss podcast, and it really stuck with me, that sometimes you don't grow with the power of addition. You actually have to strip back and pull back and create space for things, other things. And it could be space for time to play out, space for whatever. But there was something, would you like to share, just like what a striking way that sometimes a therapist doing less can be exactly what the doctor orders?
Yeah. So I had some not helpful experiences with therapy as a young child, but when my life really turned around was when I was about to start high school, and I started working with a private speech pathologist who really understood the experience of stuttering from the inside out. And I don't really remember, and this is a quote, I forgot exactly how it goes, but there's a quote that goes, you'll never, people will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel, right? And that applies to my experiences in high school when I was working with this private SLP who, I don't remember exactly what she said, but I just remember every week I would go to her office, and just, I felt this openness in that room where I could really say and be whatever was on my mind, and there was no pressure to be somebody that I wasn't. It was really about identifying like who I am in my core, how can that coexist with stuttering, and just letting me kind of I was like able to breathe for the first time when I was working with this clinician. I would just spend lots of time just like crying and unloading and just processing with the first person that really understood what the experience was like, and that like really turned my life around. And so a lot of SLPs that we interviewed for our research project talked about the importance of not adding things into the mix for clients, but the importance of taking things away, right? And so it's, as Vivian Siskin often uses the analogy of an onion, how can we peel back the layers that have accumulated over years and years and years of experience of stuttering and get to that core of what the stuttering is really about, and help the person like learn about that at the core. Yeah. There's
a fascinating thing about onions. Do you know what's unique about onions? Almost unlike any other fruit or vegetable. I won't hold you on the riddle. Well, listen, you eat an orange, you got to peel off the peel, and then you eat the fruit on the inside. If you eat a peach, you eat the fruit on the outside and the pit is on the inside. This is true maybe for cabbages as well, but an onion, on the one hand, the peel is a peel that conceals the next level that you want to get to. The heart of the onion, the sweet heart of the onion. But it is the vegetable in and of itself. It's also the peel. It's got that duality. And at the same time, you want to go further and you kind of ride that. Whereas in every other thing, you kind of like, all right, get this peel out of here. I want to get to the fruit, or let me eat the fruit and throw out the pit. But I think it goes with stages of change. And I think seeing every step, it's It's about the process. It's about the journey. It's not about the destination. The destination gives you like a direction and helps you have that vision, that aspiration. But it's really about the journey. It's about enjoying every piece as the onion, as another peel. There's so many thoughts that come to mind, but I just want to share, when you shared that story in that podcast, it reminded me of someone who will be joining me for my next workshop. I strongly believe that when we give workshops as professionals, especially those of us that don't stutter, having people who stutter share their stories and being part of those educational experiences is critical, because it's not about the content, it's about the people. That's the way therapy should work. That's the way learning should work. So this young lady, Devora, who posted her autobiographical journey on our blog, she came to me and she kept saying the words, "Tell me how to stop stuttering." But most of the time she just spent tearing up and sobbing. And probably the worst thing I could have done was serve up exactly what she was asking me for explicitly. But hanging in there, and she talks about how brutal it was and awkward it was for a teenage girl to be sitting in therapy and wanting to come back, but just to have the space to be respected, to have that stage respected. And when she was ready, she picked up the phone, and today she can't stop talking and she can't stop harassing me. When can I speak again? When can I talk to some therapists? When can I talk to people who stutter? And so just the idea that everybody has to blossom in their own time, respecting the stages, and there's so much good work to follow. So if people want to follow your work and help you, do you want to just share? I know you're looking for adults. Maybe I didn't want to leave that out. So maybe just share that and how people can follow your great stuff, whether it's on social or email or whatever you want to share.
Yeah, so we are still looking for adults who stutter to help us finalize this, like these questionnaires that can help us understand how to actually stage adults who stutter in these 5 stages of change. We have heard from lots of people that are in that last stage of maintenance. We've heard from lots of people that have already worked through the journey and have been working to solidify those changes. So we are specifically interested in hearing from folks who are perhaps earlier in the change journey. So these are maybe people that haven't had any speech therapy or just at the beginning stages of speech therapy where things are still new to them. And we would just love to hear from all people who stutter so that we can have what's known as a representative sample where we can say, yes, there are people, like these stages do apply, and we know what it's like for people who stutter in all 5 of these stages, because right now we can only really talk about the last stage of maintenance because that's where all of the participants are. So just I will provide my contact info to reach out for the survey link. It's a 20-minute research survey, and you can enter a drawing. We have a whole bunch of Amazon gift cards to give out as a thank you for participating and for sharing their perspective.
Depending on what stage of change you're up to, the Amazon gift card might just be exactly what you needed to take that leap. And for others, it's unnecessary. But you know, if you're a person who stutters, or you know an adult who stutters, this work is so important. So I just encourage you to share it and spread the word, and just give people the invitation that it's low exposure, but could really contribute to this very important, groundbreaking work. And you might get a gift card. So hey, low barrier of entry. Even if you have some resistance, think about winning that gift card. This has been awesome. Any parting wisdom now that you gave the pitch for the research project? Is there just like one thing you'd wish to impart to anyone who stutters, or to parents, educators, speech language pathologists, just like one kernel of wisdom from among your entire cornfield?
I would say like one thing that's been on my mind with all the stages work is that it's really okay to not be ready. That is such a normal process and place to be in the change journey. We know that living with stuttering is it's a lifelong commitment, it's a lifelong experience, and it is okay to not be ready today. If you've made changes, it's okay to not be ready on the other side of that too. We cycle through these changes, and that's totally normal. And so just as difficult as it is, accepting